Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, when is the government of national unity going to finalize its agreed policy agenda for the next 5 years? Because the absence of that is creating squabbles between the ANC and the DA. The two parties are now at odds over South Africa's foreign policy. They are also at odds over what policy should be implemented now while an agreed policy agenda is finalized. The ANC says existing policy should apply, but the DA says we never signed up to that. The DA's federal executive member, Willie Aucamp, and the ANC NEC member, Mzwandile Masina, are facing the nation tonight. Also on the show, should the 30% minimum pass rate be scrapped? Build One South Africa is proposing raising the pass mark to 50%, citing concerns about a generation that is inadequately prepared for future opportunities. The leader of Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane, joins us tonight. But first, my comment. So, divisions between the DA and the ANC have become glaring again. This time around, the country's foreign policy, specifically the country's relationship with Russia, is what is an issue. President Cyril Ramaphosa has described Russia as a valuable ally and friend to South Africa. He made the remarks at the Brics summit this week in Russia, appreciating that country for supporting South Africa since apartheid. Now, the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, who is also his cabinet minister, rejected this position of Russia being an ally of South Africa. The DA released a statement titled, "Putin is your friend, Mr. President, not ours," which has always been a consistent message, by the way, from the DA. And what the president said as well has always been a consistent message and position from the ANC-led government. The difference now is that the ANC is no longer in charge. It's part of a government of national unity, which involves other parties. The other difference is that the DA is no longer the official opposition. It's now part of a government. So it's fair to say any position that government expresses on behalf of the GNU must be agreed by all the parties. At the very least, that must be debated. There must be a discussion until there is consensus before that matter can be expressed as the positions of the GNU. But the problem is the GNU is winging it. They still don't have an agreed policy agenda that guides them on any policy position. And these squabbles are going to continue until there's an agreed policy that guides them, an agreed guiding document of sorts. Remember the GNU document of intent was very clear. It said that the parties in the GNU must develop an agreed policy agenda which shall include policy priorities and policy compromises. And this has still not been developed. So what are you expecting? Of course they're going to differ. Of course there are going to be squabbles. In the absence of that agreed policy agenda, the ANC believes that while that policy is still being formulated and decided on, existing policy stands. And all ministers are obligated to implement it. Whether the DA, IFP, UDM and other ministers from other parties agree with the existing policy or not. That's the position of the ANC. And the DA says, well, that's unfair. The minister in the presidency responsible for monitoring performance and evaluation, Maropene Ramokgopa, was on Face the Nation on Tuesday to talk about this. And I asked her about what policy gets implemented in the absence of an agreed policy agenda by all the GNU partners.
This MTDP is in a process of being finalized. It should be final by next year, giving the president at least content and policy direction of exactly what to announce as it relates to the State of the Nation address. And by April, the new budget that will be tabled by the minister treasury or of finance would then now be informed by this MTDP. So there's still discussions and refining processes that are taking place as it relates to this plan. That would be the policy directive of all the departments of our country in the GNU.
So that's here they're outlining this policy that is still going to be agreed on, and that's going to guide the president at the State of the Nation address next year. So the DA and other GNU partners, as things stand, it looks like they are obligated to implement existing policy until there's an agreed policy agenda. That's what the minister also said during that conversation with us on Face the Nation on Tuesday. But that's not what the DA says they agreed to. And I honestly find this principle of existing policy unfair on parties in the GNU, because existing policy is ANC policy. And yes, the ANC is the biggest party in the GNU, but it doesn't run the show anymore. So it can't continue to do things as if it won elections. But also, I don't think the DA got into the GNU to prop up the ANC or rubber stamp its policies. I mean, the DA and other parties are in the GNU to represent their constituencies as well. Now that the DA is in government, it also has a responsibility to push for interests that represent their constituencies, whether you agree with those interests or not. Members of other parties in the GNU are not just there to rubber stamp ANC policy. They must compromise, but the ANC must also compromise too. So I personally do think it's a bit unfair to expect these parties in the GNU to just implement ANC policy. Here's what Minister Ramaphosa said as well, as she was explaining this principle of, in the absence of an agreed policy agenda, existing policy is the one that takes effect.
Remember, when we came in as the GNU, we had to actually refine and table different APPs or annual performance plan of different departments based on the plan of the 6th administration. If you remember that, even budgets as well as APP, as I say, in Parliament, were actually tabled by different departments in this GNU, finalizing the term of office as it relates to the policy and programs of the 6th administration.
So until the policy priorities and the policy compromises have been finalized and put in a document that guides this GNU, these challenges are going to continue. These public squabbles are going to continue. I think the ANC must realize that they are no longer in power alone, but equally so, the DA must realize that they are no longer an official opposition party. They are now in government. The two parties must realize that this is what they signed up for. The question we're asking you, though, tonight is, do you agree with this position that all ministers in the GNU must implement existing ANC policy in the absence of an agreed policy agenda by the GNU ministers from other parties? Or is the DA right to express its opposition to policies that it disagrees with? You can send us your WhatsApp voice note on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you are sending that voice note from. And please keep them at 30 seconds. Or alternatively, you can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. After the break, we'll bring in the ANC and the DA as we move this conversation forward. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the Deputy President Paul Mashatile has scheduled the first sitting of the Government of National Unity's National Dialogue for December 16. This announcement has drawn criticism from the DA, with Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille expressing frustration over not being consulted. The DA has also accused the ANC of violating GNU agreements. This comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa referred to Russia as a valuable ally and friend during a bilateral meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Brics summit that was taking place this week in Russia. Let's speak now to the DA Federal Executive Member Willie Aucamp, who joins us now via Teams, and the ANC NEC member Mzwandile Masina. Willie and Mzwandile, thanks to both of you for making time for us. And I'll start with you, Willie. Why have you taken issue with the president's description of Russia as a friend and ally?
Good evening, Clement, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Clement, we as South Africans are now in a new compensation where it's now a government of national unity and not an ANC government alone as it was in the past. And when this GNU was formed, certain things were agreed with all the partners within the GNU. And one of those things were that, firstly, there must be sufficient consensus between at least 60% of the represented seats in the National Assembly within the partners of the Government of National Unity. And there was also an agreement with regards to foreign policy and what that must entail. So for the president to stand up on an international stage and describe somebody like Vladimir Putin and Russia as South Africa's friend and ally is unacceptable. If you look at what Vladimir Putin is doing and Russia is doing, they have invaded an independent foreign country. And there's more than 20,000 children of Ukraine that's gone missing. And for us then to stand with our president on an international stage and declare that that country and that president is our friend, whilst he knows full well that not all the members in his government of national unity share that sentiment, it's unacceptable. We can't have that. We must have sufficient consensus, and this should have been ironed out within the clearinghouse or technical committee of the government of national unity, especially with the president knowing what the DA's stance and many other partners within the government of unity stance is. It is not business as usual. The ANC must realize, Clement, that they do not govern alone anymore. They've received 40% of the vote. They are not a government alone and can do as they please in the past. They've got to hear and listen to what their partners are saying.
Mzwandile, why does the ANC believe that the DA is trying to micromanage the president with this statement?
Thank you very much. It's very unfortunate to hear some of the comments because there is one constitution in South Africa. And Section 84 of the Constitution is very clear what the president can do and cannot do. We are not co-governing with the DA. We're in the government of national unity with them. So they've got to respect that. And the president has got some prerogative in the Constitution of South Africa because this is not anything new. You know, on matters of foreign policy, on matters of defense and security, on matters of commissions and all those things, the president will use his prerogative to ensure that the country is able to do work. So I don't think that there's anything sinister from the ANC nor the president of the ANC, President Ramaphosa, to have referred to Russia as our ally, because historically we can give full account. That after the USSR gave us full support in the liberation struggle, it cannot be that today we're in the GNU, we forget who were friends and who were enemies. And we're very clear that, and I'm sure the gentleman from the DA will not be able to substantively quote anything in the statement of intent that gave them a right over foreign policy, as it were. So if there's an appetite on their part to discuss foreign policy, there are platforms that have been created, and I can assure you that whatever discussions that will take place, they will never supersede the power of the president.
Willie, do you accept that, well, it's the president's prerogative as well? Because at the end of the day, as the Democratic Alliance, you did vote for him in Parliament. You demonstrated confidence in him to lead this country and to lead this cabinet and make decisions as president that he thinks serve the interest of this country. You guys voted for him.
Yes, we did, Clement, and that was also done under the auspice of the agreement that was signed. Just coming back to what my colleague there from the ANC said now, is that it is the president's prerogative and he can say whatever he wants to say there. Clement, there's a lot of things that I, as Willie Aucamp, can do. But the question is, should I do it? I can scratch my ear now on live television. I can. But should I do it? No, I should not. So the president should not have made these statements. It should not have been done. And just to come back to what the statement of intent regarding the GNU said, clause 11.9 of that statement of intent said that foreign policy must be based on human rights, constitutionalism, the national interest, and this is very important. So let's go to human rights. Is Vladimir Putin currently breaking human rights conventions? Yes, he is. The national interest of South Africa, we are aligning ourselves to a country with whom we had less than 0.3% of trade last year. Whilst when you look and compare that to the European Union, in terms of direct foreign investment, the EU is the majority of whose members are member states of NATO, accounts for 54% of all foreign direct investment into South Africa. Now compare 54% to 0.3%. Are we really looking to the best interest of South Africa like this declaration of intent said? And it goes further, clause 11.9, and it says we must base our foreign policy on peaceful resolution of conflicts and to achieve the African agenda. Now again, are we positioning ourselves as an independent mediator like the president and the government over the last 2 years tried to do?
Yeah.
And if you are doing that, why then go onto an international stage and proclaim yourself to be the friend and an ally of one party to that conflict?
Yeah. Speaking of human rights, Willie, just I want to get your thoughts. Because John Steenhuisen was with the president in China, right? He was very happy there. We saw visuals of him so excited to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And my understanding is that the DA has always believed, for instance, in the independence of Taiwan. You've not agreed with what China is doing in Taiwan. And you've always had issues with China as a socialist state. But I didn't see you, as the DA, release a statement being unhappy about the president declaring China as an ally of ours. In fact, if anything, the leader of your party was excited there taking pictures with him on a global stage.
Clement, we are sitting in South Africa with a huge crisis with regards to economic growth and with regards to unemployment. The Democratic Alliance has made it clear from day one that those will be the two main issues that we will drive within this GNU. We will not be able to solve South Africa's problems if we can't create economic growth and create jobs in the same sense. When the president, together with members of his cabinet, which included the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, went to China, it was to go and make trade deals. There were deals made by the Minister of Agriculture, John Steenhuisen, that really was to the benefit of each and every farmer in South Africa. Small or big, doesn't matter. And that is what we've got to concentrate on. We will not always agree with everything that all our partners in the world out there are doing. But we've got to put South Africa's interest first. And this brings us back to clause 11.9 that says that we must really, in everything that we do with regards to foreign policy, ask what the benefits for South Africa will be.
Yeah.
Trading with China is definitely a benefit. Do we agree with all the things that China does? No, we do not. Do we agree with all the things that other countries that we trade with do? No, we do not. But can we trade with them? And can we do that in a way that we know that these people aren't invading other countries or aren't attacking or kidnapping children? We should be answering those questions. Those are human rights issues that are major issues that we should answer before we just go into and declare people being our friends and our allies.
Are you okay, though, with China as a socialist state? Are you okay with what's happening in Taiwan? Because if you're operating from a matter of principle, then you must be able to appreciate that the president and his delegation went to Russia to also negotiate the very same trade deals you're talking about under the Brics bloc. So, yes, you may disagree with what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but you may still appreciate that there are diplomatic conversations that are important and trade deals that can still be signed. The same way that you're applying the same approach on China. Why are you taking a similar, one approach here, but a different approach on the other one, when in principle, you should be consistent?
We are definitely consistent. If I've got a shop and somebody comes and buys stuff from me, or I sell or I buy something from one of my suppliers, it does not mean that me and that supplier have to agree on everything. We've got to ask ourselves whether we are comfortable trading with each other. And that is what the situation is in China. Do we agree with all China's policies? No, we don't. And we've made it clear. Are we in support of an independent Taiwan? Yes, we are. But that is us as the DA's policy, internal. But if we are going to go into this GNU like we did, we've got to iron out these differences with regards to foreign policy. Okay. So that when our president stands up on the international stage, he does not only speak on behalf of the ANC within the GNU, but on behalf of all the parties within this government of national unity. The emphasis must be on the unity of this government.
Okay. The sense I'm getting is that it's okay to disagree with China, but still trade with them. But it's not okay to disagree with Russia and some of its policies and still trade with them. What's your response, Mzwandile, from that?
Well, I think for me, this is political opportunism because, the BRICS, involvement of South Africa is not, it was not done in corners. It was done daylight by the people of South Africa, led by the president, by the ANC-led government, and we have not pulled out of BRICS. We continue to engage, and historically, just for Willie to know that in 1952, for instance, it was ANC leaders like Moses Kotane and Yusuf Dadoo who went to Russia to cement our relation that gave birth to the Africa-Asia-Pacific Conference in Indonesia. And that particular conference is what gave birth to the Nine Aligned Movement, which has been the stance. And on the issue of Ukraine and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, I think the ANC has been playing a major role through our president to mediate between the two countries. But it doesn't mean we forget who we are and who are our friends in the process. So I think there has been that kind of understanding from our part as the African National Congress. And I want to emphasize this point that, it can be correct that the DA is fine with the human slaughter in Palestine by their friends in Israel. And yet it is such a sin that they can undermine the head of state when he pursue our relationship that are known publicly by the people of South Africa, because the fact that, up to last year, South Africa was the leader of BRICS, and we respected the international laws, and President Putin could not even come in the country at that particular point in time because we understood where we are. But South Africa is a full member of BRICS. It's not the other way around. So when that meeting sits of the clearinghouse, I think that the choices, political choices will have to be made, because there are certain things the ANC cannot compromise. We cannot compromise who we are and where we come from in terms of foreign policy and relations. And we do work with America, in terms of foreign trade and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. And we have issues and reservations from time to time, but we find each other because we understand what we're doing. I think for me, where we are, it was unfortunate that a sitting minister confuses his responsibility. If I was the president, this is a clear case of insubordination on his part, because he has no right as a sitting minister to call on the president when there are platforms that have been created to ensure that we could deal with issues as per that.
But he still retains his job as a leader of the DA. I mean, what must he do now that he's minister? Must he no longer work and serve the DA as a leader? Look,
he can serve as a leader of the DA, but I'm saying he has to respect the fact that the ANC president, which is the president of the country, has got constitutional powers to execute work on behalf of the nation. Being part of the BRICS conference was one such activity, and calling Russia our ally It's nothing strange about it.
Is it fair for the ANC to expect the parties in the GNU to implement existing ANC policy? Because, I mean, Mzwandile, you're no longer in charge as the ANC. When you used to be in charge, it's okay to tell your ministers, this is our policy, you are obligated to implement it. Right now, you're working with other parties. So any policy agenda that drives the GNU has to be an agenda that has been agreed to by the different parties. But as it stands, the ANC expects all the ministers to just run with the policy that the ANC has been implementing over the years. Is that fair when you didn't win the elections?
That's not how the statecraft works, my brother, because, for instance, you can imagine if the ANC came into power 30 years ago and said that all the existing laws and regulations of the country are no longer valid, and then we're introducing new laws. I can tell you, 30 years later, we have not even scratched the surface. We're dealing with apartheid laws every day of our lives because we understand that this is a rule of law. So it is impossible for the GNU arrangement that is here because when we entered into the GNU agreement, arrangement, it was very clear that we've got a country that is running and we have to protect the sovereignty of the country and its integrity. Therefore, we cannot just wake up overnight. You want to instruct us because John Steenhuisen was very instructive that in his letter to complaining about the president. And I can tell you for free that there is no way that we could have overnight changed our engagement with Brics as it were now. So if there is any appetite from Steenhuisen and the DA or anybody, let them understand that we have to follow certain processes, as we have done with apartheid laws. Even today, we are still dealing with statutes that have nothing to do with us, but because we understand that those at that time, it was law, it was legal, even though it was unfortunate. Yeah,
Willie, I mean, you have constituencies. You didn't come into the GNU as the DA or any other party for that matter to prop up the ANC and just rubber stamp their policy. You also need to push the interests of your constituency. That's precisely why you are there. That's what your constituency expects. So how are you balancing that with the reality you are faced with now, where, because Mzwandile also has a point in that, there are processes to follow in order to change laws and to implement new policies. But as it stands now, government needs to run. So as the DA, if you are against implementing certain policies that are already existing now, what do you expect must happen? Because government needs to run. Services need to be rendered.
We absolutely want government to run, and services must be rendered. And I think it's disingenuous to say that we wanted everything to be scrapped. That's not at all the case. What we are saying is now we are governing together. The ANC does not govern alone. And from here onwards, we've got to respect each other. We've got to take into consideration what our partners within this GNU stance are on certain things. And this is what we as the DA feel, is that the president going onto that stage at Brics, and we don't have a problem of him attending Brics. So please do not think that we've got a problem with him attending a Brics summit. That's fine. But to announce or pronounce Russia and Vladimir Putin as our friend and our ally, that is pushing it way too far.
But that's our friend.
The president, we were, and just 1 second on an accusation that was made. The DA does not condone what's going on in the Middle East. We do not condone violence in any sort or form. And unfortunately, Mzwandile, you made that statement. We are not looking the other way. We have asked for a ceasefire in the Middle East. We have asked for the release of hostages. We have been very clear in the past that they must go back to the pre-1967 borders. We are vocal about that. So to come and say that we are willing to criticize Russia, but we don't criticize what's going on in the Middle East is not correct.
But to be fair, Willie, your leader went to Ukraine, was busy taking videos in Ukraine to show South Africans what's happening. I mean, if you want to claim this evening that you are looking at the situation in Palestine in almost equal measure, when is John Steenhuisen at least visiting? Even if the border of Palestine and Israel to show South African in the DA constituency how devastating life there is because of this continuing bombardment and renewed wave of war?
When John Steenhuisen went to Ukraine, it was to emphasize the risk that it will have on South Africans. We are talking a lot about the foreign countries and what's happening there, but we must look at South Africa, and we saw what happened. John Steenhuisen warned South Africa that we are going to see a huge increase in the cost of the food basket that every South African pays on a daily basis. And that is exactly what happened. The prices that we paid for oil and flour, and those things went skyrocketed. And John Steenhuisen went to Ukraine to emphasize that point, what the risk for South Africans are going to be. And again, it was Ukraine that was attacked by Russia. If you look at the situation in the Middle East, how did this whole thing start? Yes, it's got a long history and unfortunate history. And we are seeking for peace in the Middle East, absolutely. But we must first ask ourselves, what is going on in South Africa? I can promise you that the Gogo going to sleep hungry tonight in Bankara, north of Kuruman, where I come from, does not really care. She doesn't even have a TV to look at this interview or to worry about what's going out in the world out there. They want food on their tables. And that is what we as South Africans must do. If you look at the vulnerability of our situation currently, Clement, to just give you an idea, we are now at a time in South Africa where we are experiencing renewed optimism with the first real prospects of economic growth in almost 2 decades. Our government simply cannot afford to make statements that could jeopardize international relations and trade opportunities.
Yeah.
They are crucial for us realizing our key objectives of growth in job creation. And that is what we must look at as South Africans.
Yeah, and the war in the Middle East really also has implications for South Africans, by the way. In fact, Israel is not only fighting in Gaza, it's in Lebanon, it's in Yemen. It's expected to retaliate against Iran. If we see a wider regional war, there are going to be greater implications. The price of oil, that Gogo you're talking about, is not only going to be affected by the consequences of the war in Ukraine. In fact, what's happening in the Middle East is going to have an impact on her as well. Mzwandile, what's the solution now? What's the solution? Because also as the DA and the ANC, you can't be having squabbles in public every time there's disagreement. When are you going to sit down and agree on a policy agenda? Because the document of intent says, in fact, I think it had said 6 weeks after the formation of the GNU, you have to sit and compromise, decide on policy priorities and policy compromises and agree on an agreed policy agenda. When is that happening? Just 1 second, Willie. I'll come to you.
There are processes in place which are being led, I think, by the Deputy President of the country, where a clearinghouse will sit and discuss those issues. But I can assure you and my friend from the DA there is that we're not going to compromise on fundamentals that have sustained our movement over time, especially for no reasons, because I don't think that there was any reason for Steenhuisen to call on the president, which is talking about people who are being hungry. He has been tasked with the responsibility of agriculture. We are busy spending time squabbling about foreign policy, which is a preserve of the president. And I think that we do need that clearinghouse so that we can sort out all the issues of differences. And obviously, if we don't find each other, we'll then have to go back to the drawing board to say, what do we do as a next step? Because what we are not going to accept as the ANC is the DA thinking that they can hold the president and the ANC at ransom and bring back apartheid through a back window. That we are not going to accept.
Who said the foreign policy is the preserve of the president?
Well, that's how we've always, looked at things as an ANC run.
Because you've been governing on your own, which is not the case anymore.
So if there are any changes, I'm saying that they will need deliberation so that we can sit and come to that conclusion. I'm telling you for free that it is strategic for the country to be part of Brics, as much as it is strategic for the country to be part of the WTO and other multinational bodies. So it's not something that we are going to just say because there is a war in Russia and Ukraine, therefore we are not going to engage because we do need a new world order in the world. And we think that Brics is a strategic platform for South Africa and Africa and other progressive countries to make sure that we can press the reset button to ensure that, we no longer excluded in some of the critical bodies like United Nations Security Council and so on and so on. So because we are a significant player and that recognition has to be made.
Willie, what's the next step now? Because all of this is going to be cleared and resolved by a document that gives priorities and says this is what's guiding the GNU, whether it's on foreign policy, whether it's on transformation policies, you name it. The Deputy President earlier today announced the first national dialogue will be held on the 16th of December and another one, I think, early next year. Is this where these conversations are going to take place in your understanding?
Well, we hope that these conversations will take place as soon as possible within Cabinet and within, as Mzwandile called it, the clearing house or the technical committee. When this government of national unity was formed, we knew from day one that we will, as parties, not always agree on everything. And as the DA, we know that we will not always get what we want. But it is very important that the ANC and other parties within this GNU must also realize that. And because of those differences that we knew will come up, we agreed within the statement of intent of the government of national unity that there will be this dispute resolution mechanism. And we now urge everybody within the GNU to really make use of this dispute resolution mechanism so that we can do exactly what it says, is to get disputes resoluted. We've got to get this ironed out. Before we go on the world stage, we must show the world that this government of national unity really is a unit and that we can really work together. But we need to respect each other and allow each other the opportunity to iron out the problems that we know are there. That brings us again back to the ANC, and I think it's difficult for them, but they must realize that they are not governing alone anymore. It is not business as usual. Things change. And when John Steenhuisen speaks out, he's not only the Minister of Agriculture, he's also the leader of the Democratic Alliance, and he's representing our party within the government of national unity and cabinet. And obviously there must be respect shown to him and other party leaders as well.
Did you agree on the dates for the national dialogue as the DA? Are you in agreement with the other parties?
Clement, I must now be honest that I cannot answer that because I do not have the insight into that. But I would say that a national dialogue, any dialogue between South Africans, must always be promoted. We must be able as South Africans to speak to each other, to listen to each other. You must go and try to understand your neighbor's problems. We know what the problems in South Africa are, but we need to discuss that with each other. So unfortunately, I can't answer you on that. What I can answer you on is that we sincerely hope that the clearinghouse or this technical committee will really make earnest of the problems within this GNU so that we as a country and we as a government of national unity can concentrate on creating growth and creating jobs in this country so that we can take this country forward for every South African.
Just quickly, here's why I'm asking that question, because Helen Zille tweeted earlier today that, and I quote, "We made it clear from the start of the GNU negotiations that the national dialogue must be a joint initiative, planned and executed by the key GNU government partners. But here goes the ANC, unilaterally as usual, as they won the elections. They're doing this unilaterally." That's what Helen Zille tweeted, which was quite surprising to me because what Paul Mashatile was announcing was a product and outcome of a meeting which included you as the DA. I think Dean McPherson was represented in that meeting. So when the deputy president then announces these dates, and you've got Helen Zille who goes and tweets and says, the ANC is now doing things unilaterally again, what does that mean? Because your leader was represented in that meeting.
Clement, I did not see that tweet and I don't know exactly what she was responding to. What this conversation is tonight about is not only what was said in Russia with regards to Putin, but that we as partners within this government of national unity must work together. there can be no instance where any one party in this GNU can act unilaterally and think that they will be successful and that they will enhance unity within this GNU. So with whatever we do going forward from here, we must, and especially the ANC, who is the majority party in this GNU, but they are not a majority party anymore. They might be the biggest party. Let me rephrase that. They are the biggest party in this GNU, but they are not a majority party. And we need to incorporate the viewpoints of each and every partner within this GNU. And that is, again, bringing us back to sufficient consensus. We've got to agree with each other. And we've really got to show the world out there, and especially South Africans, that we are able to iron out the problems that we've got. But that will be very difficult if any party in this GNU are going to, on the open stage for everybody to see, are going to act unilaterally. We need to work together and try to find each other on as many places as possible.
Yeah, I just think this question about Helen is also quite relevant in this conversation, because we're talking about disagreements and parties acting unilaterally. If parties are going to agree on something and a position is being communicated by the biggest party in the GNU, you can't just have members of the DA or members of the AFP-ANC come up now and say you are doing things unilaterally when they were represented in those meetings. Mzwandile, how do you understand things to have transpired? These dates that have been agreed upon, is this after the consultation with all the parties? Yes,
we were briefed that there was a consultation with all the parties. What the DA must appreciate is that they did not win elections. And they are not the only partner in the GNU. And when the ANC, after the elections, when we accepted the outcomes, we invited all the 18 parties in parliament to participate. Some chose to stay away for reasons known to them. Others chose to join, including the DA. And when that happened, we appreciated and we worked with all the parties. It can't be that at any given time, including things like a statement from the president, the whole nation must now be debating these issues instead of debating issues of national interest. They must appreciate that we cannot run government through Twitter. All the time when something happened that Helen Zille doesn't like, she goes on Twitter and the whole nation must be entertaining those things. It's ill-discipline on their part. In the ANC, we respect this GNU as it is, but we also want these partners in the GNU to respect the ANC and to understand that 40% of the population still voted for us, and we went out in the interest of the country to invite everyone to ensure that we can build a nation together. So the national dialogue and any other platforms, including the clearinghouse, are critical in as far as ensuring that we can get this moving. But there must be no delusion on the part of the DA that then they will control the ANC even in terms of our own fundamental principles. They are free to come and let's engage, and then the superior logic will have to prevail on all the things that we'll be debating in the GNU. All right, Mzwandile Masina and Willie Aucamp, I appreciate both of you for making time for us this evening on Face the Nation. We've been asking you this question tonight. Do you agree with the position that all the ministers in the GNU must implement existing ANC policy in the absence of an agreed policy agenda? Or is the DA right here to express its opposition to policies that it disagrees with? Let's start with some of the tweets that have come through. Uyanda says, ministers must not implement ANC policies, but existing government policies. These policies remain valid until amended collectively by all parties in the GNU. MC says, in the absence of a GNU policy, the current government policy should work, which happens to be ANC policy. Morales says, the DA is correct in distancing itself from the president's recent utterances in Russia. The GNU is like a marriage. Consultation and consensus are key for the subsistence of any marriage. Let's remember that 60% of South Africans rejected the ANC. Thank you so much for your tweets. We've also asked you to send us your WhatsApp voice notes responding to this question we're asking you tonight on Face the Nation. Here's what some of you have had to say.
Hi, my name is Gwarube. I just wanted to say that the DA should stop behaving like they have won a majority over the ANC. The reality of the matter is that they are not a majority in the GNU. You've got 10 political parties. Now, you need to, at one point, have someone who drives the ship. And the DA agreed to the ANC driving the ship. The president of South Africa is the president of the ANC. The deputy president of South Africa is deputy president of the ANC. Now, that is a tacit acknowledgement that ANC policy will dominate. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Simon Mamabolo. I'm from Diepsloot. I don't think it's right for ANC to use the 6th administration policy to run the government at this moment. As much as it's a GNU, they need to quickly come up with an agreement that how they are going to run it as it is. Thank you.
Welcome back. Now, Build One South Africa has expressed disappointment about Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwarube deciding not to immediately scrap the 30% minimum pass mark. BOSA Leader Mmusi Maimane says it's important that the quality of education learners are receiving is of high standard. He joins us now via Teams to elaborate more on this. Mmusi, thank you for making time for us. Good evening.
Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans.
What exactly were you asking the Minister of Basic Education to do? What did you expect from her?
Well, in curriculum design and assessment of that curriculum, all we are asking is to move the assessment from 30% in a subject to 50%. Mm-hmm. And the argument in basic sense speaks to a few things. One is we cannot deem a child proficient in a subject when they are passing at 30%. But the broader issue is simply this, that you are asking educators to say a child is proficient when they have done something at 30% of the mark. Now, none of us would accept going to a doctor who does that, or a pilot who does that. To me, the symbolic sense of 30%, despite how the department seeks to defend it, is a clear demonstration of the fact that as South Africa, we are now confirming that we lack ambition. We don't want our children to be superstars in the world. We want, particularly children in quintile 1, 2, and 3, which are the poorest learners, to remain confined to not only unemployment, but to unemployability. And ultimately, we use the 30% so that we can say more and more learners are passing, and then we self-congratulate and say, well, 81% of learners passed matric last year, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. But when you actually look at the underlying figures, you start to work out quickly that fewer of them are passing at 50%, that particularly at key subjects like mathematics, science, etc., the average pass mark there is quite low when you benchmark it at 50%.
Yeah. Are you not satisfied with the minister's response? Because she's outlined that she has no immediate plans to raise the passing mark, but she still intends to establish an advisory council to guide these essential reforms in the education sector. Is that not sufficient? Because surely this can be done overnight.
It's certainly what we need to do is already have started to indicate that we want to progressively year on year improve it. Because at least at a minimum of 5% over the period of the 5 years, so that the child who's doing grade 8 now must know by the time they get to matric, pass marks will be 50%. For every advisory committee and every commission, etc., we find it's a neat way of packaging and delaying actual reform. Education has been in crisis for far too long. We've lived in a divided education system where if you are poor, you get very poor education. And if you've got money, you are able to get a decent education. The IEB's assessment criteria on this very particular issue, even though the government says you can pass children at 30%, but in all fairness, when you look at their broader reporting, you discover that the majority of their learners pass at over 50, and ultimately you will find that the wealthier kids are succeeding in other indicators such as the economy and life sciences, etc.
What about children that are not strong academically? As you know, we're not all gifted the same. Teachers can work as hard as they want and provide as much support as they can to learners, but there are still others that are really going to struggle to achieve that 50% mark in all of the subjects. What about them? Are you not running here the risk of leaving them behind by raising this pass mark to 50% throughout all the subjects? How do we accommodate them?
Firstly, we've got multiple exit avenues where learners can get into TVET colleges, etc. Not that that's a dropout subject, it's just to say a child may not be proficient in mathematics at 50%, but they can do something else that accommodates that so that they can still be passing at 50%. The measure of proficiency is not what we are trying to base this issue on. What we are trying to say is everyone can be 50%, can pass at 50% in different areas, rather than simply saying, no, look, we'll drop multiple areas, particularly in math, science, etc., and ask everybody to be able to pass at that lower level. That, to me, cripples the system in its entirety when you look at what then the teachers seek to achieve, what then when you look at the fact that ultimately you are improving, you look like you are synthetically improving pass marks, pass rates at the end of the matric year, but it is actually a meaningless number. So to me, I think let's up the standards. Let's ask all South Africans to improve, because when we do that, we tell the nation that we believe in our kids. When you look at the World Economic Forum measurement of our skill level as a country, it ranks us outside of 100, out of 149 countries. That to me is woeful for a country such as South Africa, where almost over 14% of our budget is allocated towards education. So we are not in essence getting bang for our buck. And then we keep saying to ourselves, well, we've got learners who can't pass at over 50, so we must drop standard. If that's the argument we want to sustain, then let's make it 25, let's make it 20. Why even have a standard?
Yeah. My understanding is that you also want, part of the reforms that you are proposing is that there must be an inclusion of an independent education ombudsman, increased salaries for educators, reduced union power. You want to incentivize pupils during their academic year, prioritize primary phase education, and introduce a school voucher program, including conducting a nationwide teacher skills audit. Is this all plausible? When you talk about even incentivizing the learners, how would this be done?
Yeah, we've got to get into the countries that have shown great success, reward excellence. They demonstrate upfront to say a learner who's doing well can get additional incentives so that they keep going. Our job, the first thing is for a million children who start school, let's ensure that many of them stay in school, that we reduce dropout rates from the levels that they are now, which is just around 40%, which means that actually we need to make sure more and more kids are staying in school and are being incentivized to stay at school. Secondly, what economy are we trying to produce here? We all can appreciate the intrinsic value of education. What is the extrinsic value? And the extrinsic value is linked often to economic opportunities that can come through. We are competing in a global universe where young people have to deal with robotics. They are dealing in an economy that requires a different set of skills. Why are we not incentivizing, particularly maths and science teachers, to stay in the system and reward them more, as you would, and then ultimately say to learners who pass it at over 50% and can compete, you can incentivize them further. At this point in time, we have empowered, in some ways, unions, hidden away assessment of teachers, and said to ourselves that, look, so long as we just seem to be indicating that more and more people are passing at matric, even though those are only a fraction of the learners who started school, we are doing well. Yeah. I think this is a powerful opportunity for Minister Gwarube, who I respect incredibly. Siviwe has been a colleague. She now has an opportunity to reform. She simply can't go in there and say, let's continue the legacy of the past and hope that our economy is going to respond positively to that.
All right, BOSA Leader Mmusi Maimane, thank you for engaging with us on Face the Nation tonight. And thanks to you for watching the Thursday edition of Face the Nation. We'll be back with you on Tuesday next week at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. Cheers.